Before we begin, let us know where you're listening from. After the story, rate it from 1 to 10. Now, let's start. The North Sea churned beneath the longship's hull, its hungry waves clawing at the dragon-headed prow as if to drag it down to Aegis domain. Olaf Quellson stood at the stern, one hand on the tiller, the other gripping his sword hilt as the English coastline emerged from the morning mist. At 30 winters, his beard was full but not yet touched by frost, his arms marked with battle scars and the runes of Thor's protection. Behind him, 40 warriors readied their shields and axes, their breath creating small clouds in the chill spring air. Land, called Ulf, the youngest of the crew at barely 18 winters. Northumbria lies before us. And with it, glory and silver, added Hakon, Olaf's most trusted warrior. The monastery at Lindisfarne is ripe for plucking. Olaf nodded, his ice-blue eyes narrowed against the salt spray. 6 years had passed since he'd led his first raid on these shores, 6 years since his father, the great Jarl Quell Ragnarsson, had fallen to a Saxon spear. Now Olaf ruled in his stead, commanding respect from the warriors of 3 fjords for his strength in battle and wisdom at the Thing. But whispers followed him still, that he was too merciful, too hesitant to spill blood unless necessary. Some men called it weakness. Olaf called it honor. Remember, he called to his men as the ship cut through the final stretch of open water, we take what we need, gold, silver, food, and thralls to work our lands. But no needless slaughter. The gods do not smile on those who kill without purpose. Some of the men grumbled, but none dared challenge him openly. Not after what happened to Gorm Flatnose last summer when he'd questioned Olaf's leadership. The fight had been brief but decisive. Gorm now served as a reminder that Olaf's mercy had limits. The longship beached with a satisfying crunch on the pebbled shore. Within moments, the warriors had leapt into the shallows, pulling the vessel further onto land. Weapons were checked, shields slung over shoulders. The monastery lay just beyond the small fishing village that dotted the coast, easy prey if the timing was right. "Thou guide our arms," Olaf murmured, touching the hammer pendant at his neck before leading his men forward. The raid went as smoothly as the calm waters they had sailed upon. The village offered little resistance, most fled into the surrounding forest at the first sight of the dragon-headed ship. The monastery's inhabitants, pious men with soft hands and softer bellies, surrendered their treasures with prayers on their lips. Olaf allowed his men to take what they could carry but kept a watchful eye on their behavior. It was in the scriptorium that he found her. Unlike the monks who cowered or the servants who wept, she stood defiant, a small iron blade clutched in her hand. Her hair was roughly shorn, her face smudged with dirt, but there was something in her stance that gave Olaf pause. She wore the simple homespun dress of a servant, yet she held herself like a shield maiden. "Put down the knife, girl," Olaf said in the broken Saxon tongue he had learned over years of raiding. "I have no wish to harm you." "Then leave this place, heathen," she replied in flawless Norse, her accent betraying only the slightest foreign lilt. "Take your men and return to your frozen homeland." Olaf raised an eyebrow, surprised both by her language skills and her boldness. "You speak the tongue of the North well for a Saxon thrall." "I am no Saxon," she spat, her knuckles white around the knife handle. "And I am no one's thrall." Before she could say more, Hakon burst into the room, his arms laden with golden crosses and silver chalices. "Olaf!" "The tide turns soon." "We must," he stopped, noticing the girl. "Another for the slave market in Hedeby? She'll fetch a good price if she's unharmed." The girl's eyes widened in fear, and Olaf saw something else there, calculation, as if she were weighing her options for escape. "No," Olaf decided suddenly. "This one comes with me. She speaks our tongue. She may be useful on my farmstead." "As you wish," Hakon shrugged, clearly uninterested in one thrall when his arms were full of treasure. When they were alone again, Olaf stepped closer to the girl, who raised her knife higher. "I will not harm you," he said softly. "But you will come with us." "Drop the blade." "And if I refuse?" "Then I cannot guarantee your safety from my men. Some are less restrained than I." She studied his face for a long moment, her unusual violet blue eyes seeming to peer into his very soul. Finally, with a sigh of resignation, she lowered the knife. "What is your name?" Olaf asked. "Helena," she said after a pause, as if considering whether to lie. "Helena Norwood." Strange name for one who claims not to be Saxon. "My mother was Saxon," she replied quickly. "My father was from elsewhere." Olaf didn't press further, simply nodding and gesturing toward the door. "Come, Helena Norwood. Your life in the north begins today." The return voyage was swift, blessed by favorable winds that filled the sail and carried them across the sea to the fjord Olaf called home. His settlement stood at the water's edge, a collection of sturdy wooden buildings surrounding a great hall, with fields stretching up the gentle slopes beyond. Sheep grazed on the hillsides, and smoke rose from several forges where iron was worked into tools and weapons. Helena remained quiet throughout the journey, observing everything with those remarkable eyes that seemed to miss nothing. When they landed, Olaf assigned her to the care of Jida, the elderly woman who managed his household. "She speaks our tongue," he told Jida. "Put her to work, but treat her well. She may have valuable knowledge." Jida, her face a map of wrinkles earned through 80 winters, squinted at Helena. "HMPH, too thin. Too proud. I'll fix both." Over the following weeks, Olaf watched from a distance as Helena integrated into his household. She worked without complaint, though he often caught her staring out to sea or studying the guards' movements as if planning an escape. There was something about her that didn't quite fit her role. The way she held a knife when cutting vegetables betrayed training beyond a servant's, and once he observed her correcting a child's runes as if she herself were educated. One evening, as summer reached its height and the sky remained bright even as the settlement prepared for sleep, Olaf found Helena sitting alone by the shore, staring across the water. "Do you miss your home?" he asked, settling on a rock nearby. She glanced at him, then back to the sea. "My home was taken from me long before you found me at the monastery. Yet you do not seem content here." "Should I be? I am a thrall in a foreign land." Olaf considered her words. "You are treated well. Fed well. Not forced to share anyone's bed. Many thralls would consider that fortune enough. And should I be grateful for basic decency?" There was fire in her voice now, a glimpse of the defiance he'd first seen in the scriptorium. "No," he conceded. "But you could accept it as the reality of your situation." Helena turned to face him fully, and in the golden evening light, with the dirt of the day's labor washed from her face, Olaf was struck by her beauty. Not the soft, yielding beauty valued by many of his countrymen, but something fiercer, a beauty tempered by hardship and determination. "What were you before?" he asked suddenly. "Before the monastery. You are no ordinary servant." She hesitated, weighing her words carefully. "I was many things. A daughter. A student. A fugitive." "From what did you flee?" "From whom?" she corrected. "And that is a tale I have no wish to share with my captor." Olaf nodded, respecting her reserve even as his curiosity deepened. "Fair enough. But know this, in my household, you may earn more freedom than you think. Prove your value, and your chains become lighter. All chains are heavy, Jarl Olaf, no matter how finely wrought." As she spoke, a strand of her growing hair fell across her face, and Olaf was seized by the sudden urge to brush it away. He resisted, standing abruptly. "Rest well, Helena. Tomorrow brings new tasks." Throughout the summer and into the harvest season, Helena's position in the household gradually changed. Her intelligence and skills, she could read and write in multiple languages, knew healing herbs, and could calculate figures faster than the settlement's trader, made her increasingly valuable. Jida, initially suspicious, came to rely on her assistance, and the children of the settlement gathered around her in the evenings to hear stories from distant lands. Olaf found himself seeking her company more often, initially under the pretense of learning about Saxon defenses or Christian customs, but increasingly because he enjoyed her quick wit and challenging perspectives. She spoke of philosophy and mathematics as easily as she discussed the seasons and tides, revealing an education far beyond what any thrall should possess. after a particularly successful harvest celebration, when most of the settlement was deep in drunken slumber, Olaf discovered Helena in his private quarters, examining the maps and books he had collected on his travels. She froze when he entered, a leather-bound volume in her hands. "I should have you whipped for entering unbidden," he said, though there was no anger in his voice. "Then do so," she replied, carefully replacing the book. "But it would be a waste of both our time." Olaf laughed, the mead he had consumed making him more honest than usual. "You are the most vexing thrall any Jarl has ever owned." "Perhaps because I was never meant to be a thrall." "And what were you meant to be, Helena Norwood?" She stepped closer, and Olaf caught the scent of lavender she somehow managed to cultivate even in his northern garden. "In another life?" "Perhaps your equal." The tension between them shifted then, from the familiar friction of master and servant to something more dangerous. Olaf was acutely aware of her proximity, of the dim lamplight casting shadows that softened her features, of the way her gaze held his without submission or fear. "You are unlike any woman I have known," he admitted. "You know nothing of who I truly am." "Then tell me." For a moment, it seemed she might, her lips parted, her expression vulnerable in a way he had never seen before. But then she stepped back, rebuilding the invisible wall between them. "Good night, Jarl Olaf." Winter descended upon the settlement with icy fingers that grasped at every crack in the wooden buildings. Snow piled high against the walls, and the fjord froze near the edges. Inside the great hall, fires burned continuously, and the community gathered close for warmth and companionship during the long dark days. It was during one such evening, with a blizzard howling outside and tales being shared around the central hearth, that the trouble began. Traders from a neighboring settlement had sought shelter from the storm, bringing news and gossip along with their goods. One of them, a barrel-chested man named Ragnar with an eye for beauty, had been watching Helena throughout the meal. When she rose to fetch more mead, he grabbed her wrist. "I'll give you 6 silver pieces for this one, Olaf," he called across the hall. "She's too fine for serving. She should be warming a man's bed." Helena's face remained impassive, but Olaf saw her free hand drift toward the knife at her belt, a privilege he had granted her months ago, unusual for a thrall. "She is not for sale," Olaf replied evenly, though he felt a surge of anger at the man's presumption. "Everything has a price," Ragnar insisted, his grip tightening on Helena's wrist. 8 silver pieces, then. And 2 fine furs." The Jarl said no, Helena stated calmly, though her eyes had taken on the dangerous glint Olaf had come to recognize as a warning. "Thralls don't speak unless spoken to," Ragnar growled, yanking her closer. "Perhaps Olaf has been too soft with you. You need a firmer." What happened next occurred so quickly that many in the hall would later disagree on the sequence of events. Helena's free hand moved in a blur, and suddenly Ragnar was howling, a small knife embedded in the table between his spread fingers, missing his hand by the width of a straw. "The next one goes through your palm," Helena said, her voice deadly quiet. The hall fell silent. For a thrall to threaten a free man was unheard of, it was grounds for severe punishment, even execution. All eyes turned to Olaf, waiting for his response to this shocking breach of social order. Olaf rose slowly from his seat, his expression unreadable. He crossed to where Helena stood, still locked in Ragnar's now slack grip, and gently removed the trader's hand from her wrist. "You see now why she is not for sale at any price," he said mildly. "She has other values. She should be flogged for such insolence." Ragnar sputtered, his face red with humiliation. "In my hall, my thralls are under my protection and discipline," Olaf replied, a steely edge entering his voice. "You will respect that, or you will find shelter from the storm elsewhere." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a blade. Finally, Ragnar nodded curtly and returned to his ale, though his wounded pride was evident in every rigid line of his body. Later that night, when the hall had emptied and only the night guards remained awake, Olaf found Helena in the storage room, methodically checking preserved foods as if nothing unusual had occurred. "You took a great risk tonight," he said without preamble. "Would you have preferred I let him pour at me? I would have intervened. I've never needed a man to fight my battles." Olaf studied her in the dim light of the single lamp. "Where does a thrall learn to handle a knife with such precision?" Helena's hand stilled on the grain sack she was inspecting. Perhaps I was not always a thrall. No, Olaf agreed, stepping closer. I think you were never a thrall at all. Her eye snapped to his, wary and calculating. Who are you really, Helena Norwood? Your movements betray training. Your speech reveals education. Your hands, he reached out and took one of her hands in his, turning it over to reveal the palm. These are not the hands of a woman who has spent her life in servitude. The calluses are wrong. Helena didn't pull away, but her entire body tensed like a drawn bow. What will you do if I tell you the truth? Sell me to a higher bidder? Ransom me? That depends on the truth. For a long moment, she simply stared at him, as if trying to read his intentions in his eyes. Then, with a deep breath, she straightened her posture in a way that transformed her entire bearing. My name is Helena Norwick, she said, her voice taking on a different cadence, more refined and assured. Daughter of King Edgar Norwick of Northumbria. And you, Olaf Quellson, raided my father's monastery where I had taken refuge after my half-brother Ethild usurped my father's throne and attempted to force me into marriage with his ally, the brutal Mercian warlord Oswald. Olaf's hand dropped away from hers in shock. A princess. The rightful heir to Northumbria, she corrected. Though that matters little now. My father is dead, poisoned by my half-brother's men. My supporters either killed or scattered. The monastery was my last sanctuary, and now even that is gone. Why tell me this now? Because winter makes fools of us all, she said with a bitter smile. And because I tire of pretending to be less than I am. You realize I could demand an enormous ransom. You could. But you won't. You seem very certain of that. Helena stepped closer, close enough that he could feel the warmth of her breath. Because I have watched you, Olaf Quellson. You raid, but you do not slaughter needlessly. You command, but you listen to counsel. You own thralls, but you treat them with dignity. You are not the monster our priests painted all Northmen to be. Olaf felt something shift between them, a final barrier crumbling away. Without thinking, he reached up and traced the line of her jaw with his fingertips. And you are not the cowering Saxon princess I would have expected. We are both more and less than the stories told about us. When his lips met hers, it felt inevitable, like the tide meeting the shore after a long journey across the sea. Her arms wound around his neck, and he pulled her against him, marveling at how perfectly she fit there, as if the gods had shaped them for each other across enemy lines. But their newfound understanding faced immediate challenges. The following day, as the storm cleared, another ship arrived at the settlement, bearing warriors from a neighboring jarl who brought dire news. Saxon forces have attacked settlements along the southern coast, the messenger reported in Olaf's hall. They say it's retaliation for raids, but this was no ordinary defense. They came in the night, burned 3 villages to the ground. Women, children, no one was spared. Which Saxons? Olaf demanded, conscious of Helena standing rigidly nearby, her face carefully blank. They flew the banner of Northumbria. Led by a warlord named Ethild. Helena's small intake of breath was audible only to Olaf, who stood closest to her. The messenger continued, unaware of her reaction. The Jarls are gathering a force for vengeance. Every able warrior is called to join. We sail with the next favorable tide. That night, Olaf found Helena packing a small bundle of provisions in the storeroom. You're leaving, he stated flatly. I must, she replied without looking up. When your men discover who I am, that I am sister to the man who slaughtered their kinsman, my life will be forfeit. No one here knows your true identity but me. And how long before someone makes the connection? Before someone recognizes me, or questions why you keep a thrall so close? Ethild is my blood, Olaf. Your people would be right to hate me for it. Olaf grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to face him. You are not your brother. Tell that to the widows when they cry for blood. I won't let them harm you. Helena's laugh was hollow. Even a jarl cannot stand against blood feud. You know this. Your own father died in such a conflict. Then come with me, he said suddenly. What? When we sail to confront your brother's forces. Come with me. Help me end this without needless slaughter on either side. Helena shook her head in disbelief. You would trust me? The sister of your enemy. I trust Helena, who has lived among us for nearly a year. Who has cared for our children, tended our sick, shared our hardships. Whatever blood flows in your veins, I know your heart. Tears filled her eyes, but she blinked them away fiercely. You ask the impossible. I cannot stand against my own people, yet I cannot bear to see harm come to yours. I am torn in two, Olaf. He cupped her face in his hands. Then help me find a third path. One where neither side must bleed more than they already have. The war council was held 2 days later in Olaf's great hall. 6 jarls and their chief warriors gathered to plan their revenge against the Northumbrians. The air was thick with anger and grief as men recounted the losses at the southern settlements. We will burn every village from the coast to their king's hall, declared Jarl Eric Broadaxe, a massive man with a reputation for berserker rage in battle. Let them taste the same fire they brought to our people. Shouts of agreement filled the hall. Olaf rose from his high seat, his expression grave. Their attacks were monstrous, he acknowledged. And they will answer for it. But I propose a different approach. Murmurs of curiosity and suspicion rippled through the assembly. Rather than scattered burning of villages, we strike directly at the source, Olaf continued. At Eadald himself. Cut off the serpent's head, and the body dies. And how do you propose we reach this Eadald? Asked Jarl Thorfinn the Wise, an older leader known for his strategic mind. His fortress at Bambo is well defended. I have information, Olaf said carefully, that Eadald will be traveling to York for the Easter celebration, with a smaller force than usual. We can intercept him on the road. What information? Eric demanded suspiciously. How would you know the movements of a Saxon king? Olaf had prepared for this question. We took a monk in our last raid who served in Eadald's court. He provided this intelligence in exchange for his freedom. The explanation seemed to satisfy most, though a few exchanged skeptical glances. The council turned to discussing the logistics of such an attack, and by the time they dispersed at dawn, a plan had been formed. 3 ships would sail within the week, carrying 90 warriors to strike at Eadald's traveling party. When Olaf returned to his private quarters, Helena was waiting, her face pale with tension. They agreed to your plan, she said. It wasn't a question. Yes. We target Eadald directly, sparing the innocent. There's something you should know about my brother, Helena said, her voice low and urgent. He's a coward at heart. He will surrender if cornered, but he's cunning. He'll offer anything, gold, land, thralls, to save his own skin. Many men value their lives over honor. It's not just that. Helena paced the small room. When he travels to York, he will bring hostages, children of nobles who support me. If he's threatened, he'll use them as shields. Olaf frowned. How many? At least 6. Boys and girls between 8 and 12 winters. Children of the families who remained loyal to my father. This complicated matters significantly. Viking warriors might hesitate to harm children, but in the heat of battle, with vengeance in their hearts, accidents could happen. And if the children were killed, any hope of peaceful resolution with the Northumbrian nobles would die with them. I must come with you, Helena said firmly. It's too dangerous. Those children know me. Trust me. In the chaos of an attack, I can get them to safety while your men focus on Eadald. She gripped his arm. Please, Olaf. I cannot sit here safely while innocent children die. He knew she was right, though the thought of bringing her into danger tore at his heart. How will I explain your presence to the other jarls? Tell them I'm a thrall who knows the land and Saxon customs. That I'll serve as guide and interpreter. It's close enough to the truth. And if we succeed? If we capture Eadald? Helena's eyes hardened. Then I will reveal myself and reclaim what is mine. The preparations for departure were swift and efficient. Warriors checked their weapons, packed provisions, and made offerings to Thor and Odin for victory. The 3 longships were made ready, their dragon heads freshly painted to strike fear into Saxon hearts. On the morning they were to sail, Olaf performed the ritual sacrifices, spilling the blood of a goat over the prow of his ship and invoking the gods' protection. As the assembled warriors roared their approval, he caught sight of Helena standing apart from the crowd, dressed in the simple clothing of a thrall but with a knife concealed at her waist and a determined set to her jaw. Only Hakon, Olaf's most trusted warrior, knew the truth of her identity and purpose. The others had accepted Olaf's explanation of her usefulness without question, though a few grumbled about bringing a woman, even a thrall, on a war expedition. The journey south was swift, blessed by favorable winds that seemed to confirm the gods' approval of their venture. They made landfall at night on a deserted stretch of coast, hiding the ships in a secluded cove before moving inland. According to Helena's intelligence, Ethel's party would pass along the old Roman road the following day. That night, as the warriors made camp in a dense forest clearing, Olaf found Helena standing watch at the perimeter, her eyes scanning the darkness. "You should rest," he said softly, coming to stand beside her. "I'll rest when the children are safe," she replied. Then, after a pause, "and when justice is done." "What will justice look like to you, Helena?" "Your brother's death." She turned to face him, her expression troubled in the moonlight. "Once, I would have said yes without hesitation. But now, I don't know. Death seems too simple for his crimes." "Then what?" "Exile," she said finally. "Strip him of power, of wealth, of status. Let him live knowing he failed, watching from afar as I rebuild what he tried to destroy. That would be a fitting punishment for a man who values power above all else." Olaf nodded slowly. "A wise judgment. More merciful than many would give, yet perhaps more painful in the end." "Is it strange," she asked, "that I find myself thinking like a North woman now? Considering what would hurt most rather than what church law would demand. You've lived among us. Learned our ways. Just as I've learned something of yours." He took her hand, running his thumb over her knuckles. "Perhaps that's the beginning of understanding between our peoples." "A dangerous thought," she murmured, though she didn't pull away. "One that could get us both killed tomorrow." "Then let us have tonight," Olaf said, drawing her closer. "Whatever comes with the dawn." In the grey light of early morning, Olaf's warriors took their positions along the roadside, concealed among trees and brush. Helena remained close to Olaf, her heart pounding as she scanned the horizon for the first sign of her brother's party. "Remember," Olaf instructed his men in hushed tones, "we want Ethel alive if possible. And the children are not to be harmed under any circumstances." The warriors nodded grimly, though Helena could see the bloodlust in some of their eyes. The waiting stretched on, the sun climbing higher, until finally the distant sound of hoofbeats and creaking wagon wheels reached their ears. "They come," Hakon whispered. The procession that appeared around the bend in the road was smaller than expected, perhaps 20 mounted warriors surrounding a covered wagon and another open cart carrying chests and supplies. At their head rode a man in fine mail and a golden circlet. "Ethel," Helena breathed, recognizing her half-brother despite the years that had passed. He had grown heavier, his face flushed with the signs of too much wine, but his bearing was unmistakable. "And the children?" Olaf asked quietly. Helena's eyes searched the group, finally spotting small faces peering out from the covered wagon. "There. In the wagon." Olaf gave the signal, and with a thunderous war cry, the Vikings burst from their hiding places. The initial assault was devastating. Half of Ethel's guards fell before they could even draw their swords, cut down by throwing axes and arrows. The remaining Saxon warriors formed a protective circle around their king and the wagon, swords raised. "Surrender, Ethel of Northumbria!" Olaf called out in Saxon, stepping forward with his shield raised and sword ready. "Your life may be spared if you yield now." Ethel's face contorted with rage and fear. "Never to heathen dogs," he shouted back. Then, to his men, "Protect your king. Fight to the death." The battle was joined in earnest then, the clash of steel on steel filling the air as Viking warriors engaged the desperate Saxons. Olaf fought his way toward Ethelred, his skill evident in every precise strike and parry. Helena circled the fight, keeping to the edge of the forest as planned, waiting for her moment to reach the wagon. When a gap opened in the fighting, she darted forward, keeping low and using the chaos as cover. She reached the back of the wagon just as a Saxon warrior noticed her. Before he could raise the alarm, an axe buried itself in his chest, Hakon providing cover as arranged. Helena pulled herself into the wagon and came face to face with 6 terrified children, huddled together in the back. "Who are you?" demanded the oldest, a boy of about 12, trying to sound brave despite his fear. "I am Helena Norwick," she said, throwing back her hood. "Daughter of King Edgar. I've come to take you to safety." The children stared in disbelief. The youngest girl began to cry. "Princess Helena? They said you were dead." "Clearly not," Helena replied with a quick smile. "Now listen carefully. When I give the word, you will all run into the forest there, where a friend waits to guide you to safety. Do not stop, do not look back. Understand?" The children nodded, wide-eyed. Helena peered out of the wagon. The fighting had intensified, with Olaf and his warriors pressing the advantage. Ethelred remained mounted but was being driven back toward the wagon, exactly as planned. "Now!" Helena hissed, helping the children down. "Run to the trees." As the children scrambled toward the forest edge where Hakon waited, Helena turned back toward the battle. Ethelred's eyes met hers across the chaos, and she saw the moment recognition dawned on his face. "Impossible," he gasped, his sword wavering. "Helena." His moment of shock was all Olaf needed. With a powerful strike, he knocked Ethelred from his horse. The usurper king fell hard, his golden circlet rolling in the dirt. Within seconds, Viking warriors had surrounded him, weapons pointed at his throat. "Yield," Olaf commanded. Ethelred's eyes darted between Olaf and Helena, who now stepped forward into clear view. "Sister," he said, his voice dripping with false warmth. "Thank the Lord you live. Have these heathens held you captive all this time? Order them to release me, and I shall see them rewarded rather than slaughtered." Helena laughed bitterly. "Still lying, brother, even with blades at your throat. These men are my allies. And you are my prisoner." The remaining Saxon warriors, seeing their king captured, threw down their weapons in surrender. Olaf's men quickly bound them, though with less roughness than might have been expected. The children were brought back from the forest edge, now under Hakon's protective watch. "What is this?" demanded Eric Broadaxe, looking from Helena to Olaf in confusion. "Why does this thrall speak to the Saxon king as an equal? And why does he call her sister?" Olaf stepped forward, sheathing his blooded sword. "Because she is no thrall. This is Helena Norwick, rightful queen of Northumbria, whose throne this man stole through murder and treachery." Murmurs of shock rippled through the Viking warriors. Some gripped their weapons tighter, eyeing Helena with newfound suspicion. "You bring a Saxon royal among us?" Eric growled. "While her brother burns our settlements and kills our people. I brought someone who helped us achieve victory without a single loss among our own," Olaf countered. "Someone who has lived among us, worked beside us, earned her place through her own merit." "She has deceived us," another warrior called out. "No," Hakon interjected, surprising many with his defense. "The Jarl knew her identity. She has proven her loyalty by helping us capture the true enemy, this man who would have slaughtered us all given the chance." Helena stepped forward, her bearing now fully that of royalty despite her simple clothing. "I understand your mistrust," she said to the assembled warriors. "But know this, I have lived in your lands, learned your ways, and come to respect your people. My brother's actions are not mine. I offer you something more valuable than revenge, a lasting peace between our peoples, secured by treaties and trade rather than raid and counter-aid." "Pretty words," scoffed Eric. "But words do not bring back the dead." "No," Helena agreed. "They don't. Which is why I will ensure those responsible for the attacks on your settlements face justice, starting with the man who ordered them." She turned to her brother, who knelt in the dirt, his fine clothes now stained with mud and blood. "Eald of Northumbria, I charge you with the murder of our father, King Edgar, with usurpation of the throne, and with ordering the slaughter of innocent Norse settlers. How do you answer?" Eald's face twisted with hatred. "I need not answer to a woman, nor to heathen invaders. The throne is mine by right of strength." "Then you admit to these crimes?" "I admit to protecting our lands from these barbarians. To securing my rightful place. Father was weak, he would have had us bow to these animals, let them settle our lands, take our women, enough." Helena's voice cut through his ranting. She turned to Olaf. "You have heard his confession. What say you and your fellow Jarls? What is just punishment for such crimes?" It was a masterful move. By deferring to the Viking leaders for judgment, she acknowledged their power while simultaneously claiming her own authority. Olaf saw the calculation in her eyes and responded accordingly. "The judgment of such a high-born criminal should be decided by the Thing," he said, referring to the Norse assembly that governed legal matters. "But given the circumstances, we Jarls may serve in its place." The Jarls conferred briefly, then Olaf pronounced their decision. "Eald of Northumbria, for your crimes against both your own people and ours, you are sentenced to exile. You will be taken north, across the sea, to live out your days on a remote island, stripped of all rank and possessions. There you may contemplate the cost of your ambition." It was a punishment that satisfied both Viking notions of justice and Helena's earlier wish. Death might have been simpler, but exile, especially for a man who craved power and luxury, was a far more fitting penalty. "And what of Northumbria?" asked Thorfinn the Wise. "Who shall rule in his stead?" All eyes turned to Helena, who stood straight and proud. "I am my father's chosen heir. With your support, I will reclaim my throne and forge a new relationship between our peoples, one based on mutual respect rather than fear." "A Saxon queen who speaks Norse, who understands our ways," mused Thorfinn. "That could be valuable indeed. But can she be trusted?" Eric demanded, still skeptical. "I trust her with my life," Olaf declared, moving to stand beside Helena. Then, taking her hand in full view of all assembled, he added, "and with my heart." A shocked silence fell over the group, broken finally by Hakon's laughter. "Well, that explains much." In the days that followed, a delegation traveled to York, where Helena presented herself to the Northumbrian nobles along with the rescued children, living proof of her concern for her people. With the support of the Viking Jarls, and the implicit threat of their warriors, her claim to the throne was acknowledged with surprisingly little resistance. Many were simply relieved to be rid of Eald's brutal rule. A month later, Helena Norwick was crowned Queen of Northumbria in the Great Church at York. Among those in attendance was Olaf Quellson, no longer in warrior's garb but dressed as befitted a diplomatic envoy. Their public interactions were formal and correct, giving no hint of the deeper bond between them. But that night, in the privacy of the Queen's chambers, formality fell away. "So," Olaf said, watching as Helena removed the heavy crown and placed it on a table. "A queen once more. Does it feel as you remembered?" "I was never queen before," she reminded him. "Only a princess. And no, it feels heavier than I imagined. So many expectations. So many who doubt a woman can rule effectively. You will prove them wrong." "Perhaps." She turned to face him, suddenly vulnerable despite her royal status. "But what of us, Olaf? A Norse Jarl and a Saxon queen, what future can we possibly have?" He crossed the room to her, taking her hands in his. "The future we create. Your nobles need allies against Mercian aggression. My people need secure trading ports and farmland. Together, we offer both our people something they need. A political alliance," she said with a sad smile. "That is what the world will see," he agreed. "But we will know the truth, that this began not in council chambers but in a monastery storeroom, with a thrall who was never truly a thrall and a raider who found something more valuable than silver." "They will resist," Helena warned. On both sides. Your people may call you Oathbreaker for allying with Saxons. Mine will whisper that I have been bewitched by a heathen. Let them whisper, Olaf said firmly. While they talk, we will build something new, settlements where Norse and Saxon live side by side, trading goods and knowledge instead of blows. Children who speak both tongues, who honor both traditions. A dream worthy of schools, Helena murmured, leaning into his embrace. A dream we have already begun to live, he countered. You learned our ways. I learned to see beyond old hatreds. If we too can change, others can follow. In the spring, when the ice had melted from the fjords and the seas were calm enough for safe passage, a unique wedding took place on the borders between Northumbria and the Norse settlements. Under an arch woven with both Saxon crosses and Thor's hammers, Queen Helena Norwick and Jarl Olaf Quellson exchanged vows, first in Saxon custom, blessed by a priest, then in Norse tradition with the exchange of swords and rings. Representatives from both peoples watched with varying degrees of acceptance and skepticism. But none could deny the sincerity in the couple's eyes as they sealed their union with a kiss that bridged cultures, faiths, and ancient enmities. In the years that followed, the alliance prospered. Norse settlements along the coast were formally recognized by the Northumbrian crown in exchange for military support against Mercian expansion. Trade flourished, and slowly, cautiously, the two communities began to integrate. Children of mixed parentage became increasingly common, growing up with both languages on their tongues. There were challenges, of course. Old hatreds did not die easily. Raids from other Viking groups who did not recognize the treaty caused tensions. Religious differences led to heated disputes. But at the center of it all stood Queen Helena and Jarl Olaf, steadfast in their commitment to the future they had envisioned together. On the 10th anniversary of their union, as they stood on the cliffs overlooking the sea that had once divided their peoples, Helena turned to her husband with a smile. Do you remember what you said when you found me in the monastery? Put down the knife, girl. I have no wish to harm you. Olaf laughed, the lines around his eyes crinkling with mirth and the wisdom of years. And you replied in perfect Norse, threatening to send me back to my frozen homeland. I should have known then that you were no ordinary thrall. And I should have known you were no ordinary raider, she replied, leaning against his shoulder. Though I was determined not to see it. The gods weave strange patterns in the tapestry of our lives, Olaf mused, his arm slipping around her waist. Who would have thought that day would lead to this? A thrall who was a princess. A warlord who became a peacemaker. And two enemies who found in each other not just love, but a vision for something greater than either could achieve alone. Below them, in the harbor, ships from both cultures bobbed side by side, Saxon trading vessels and Norse longships, their crews mingling on the docks. In the fields beyond, the spring planting was underway, with techniques borrowed from both traditions yielding harvests more bountiful than either had known separately. It is not perfect, Helena acknowledged, watching a group of children, some fair-haired, some dark, playing together near the water's edge. There is still mistrust. Still conflict. But there is also hope, Olaf completed her thought. And where there is hope, there is possibility. As the sun began to set, casting gold across the waters that had once carried raiders to these shores, Helena and Olaf turned toward home, not as conqueror and captive, not as Jarl and Thrall, but as partners in a bold experiment that would, in time, help reshape the future of both their peoples. For in their union lay the truth that neither had fully understood when first they met, that the strongest bonds are forged not in domination, but in recognition of equal worth. And that love, when it transcends the boundaries of ancient hatred, can build bridges where once there were only walls.